Well, at the age of 19, I was a young man out of high school. I was kind of a gearhead, was into cars and all that stuff, and I had gotten very lucky and joined up with a traveling stunt show of sorts that went around doing all these car tricks at fairgrounds and speedways. In June of 1968, I got my letter from Uncle Sam saying, "The fun's over, kid. You're coming with us." It was the peak of Vietnam, mid-68. I called my dad and I said, as I'm asking him, what should I do? In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, here I am asking a World War II vet, what should I do? I know what his answer is going to be. And he says, "I guess you're going to go." And I went, "I guess you're right, I will." So I reported, and like most of us who were drafted, found myself at an infantry basic training center at Fort Benning. I arrived in South Vietnam in early November of '68. And if you look back, that was right at the end of President Johnson's term. He had already announced he wasn't going to run again. Nixon had been elected, but it was prior to the inauguration, so it was kind of the lame duck Johnson period. And I reported to an infantry line company out in the rice paddies. I was with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, which was a separate brigade formed at Fort Benning just for duty in Vietnam. It was like a purpose-built light infantry brigade just for Vietnam. And we operated west of Saigon in that area called the Parrot's Beak, where the Cambodian border got dangerously close to Saigon. We operated in that area northwest of there. And for a month, all we did was guard this bridge. Attacked for like the first 6 weeks I was there. A lot of booby traps. It was a heavily booby-trapped area. That area went back to the old Viet Minh in the 50s when they fought the French, and it was a Viet Cong hotbed. But everything we did was kind of passive until Nixon took the oath, and then it was like night and day. The missions got bigger, longer, went further out, closer to the Cambodian border, and then we started making enemy contact on a regular basis for the rest of the time I was there. If you look back, when Nixon came in, he came in with the program of Vietnamization. We're going to phase out the Americans, turn it over to South Vietnamese. But he wasn't going to do that without one last big offensive push. As you know, right after that came the Cambodian incursion and all that. I was already out of there by then. I lasted 7 months. On my 7th month, I hit a booby trap, and that got me out. It was $1 million wound, so to speak. I hit an anti-personnel mine, a homemade mine. And it did not blow my foot off. It could have, and it didn't. But it busted my foot up enough that I was out of there, and it got me out of Vietnam. We were in the field, out in the bush. You stayed away from any drugs. I mean, if somebody pulled out a joint, it was like, get that out of here. Number one, it stinks. They can smell us. Number two, we don't want some guy high humping with us. It's going to get somebody hurt. Now, you go to the rear. That's where you saw it. And even when I was there, yeah, the couple trips I got to the rear, there was pot and drugs all over the place. So when you hear about drug abuse in Vietnam, you're hearing mostly about the rear echelon troops that weren't in combat hot zones. And the fragging, that came later because you have to understand, once Vietnamization started taking place, every unit knew sooner or later we're getting pulled out. And you had guys there that were of the thinking, hey, I don't want to be the last guy to die in Vietnam, because by then they knew that we were kind of there for no good reason. We were leaving. So I think you had a lot of guys when you got into 1970, 71, you saw a lot more of that discontent with the troops. It's like, why should we go out in some, hot zone near the Cambodian border when you guys are giving this war away anyway till it's all said and done? But during the time I was there, we were still fighting like we were going to win it. Whether or not we lost it militarily or politically, I mean, that's a no-brainer. The troops that were there, whether they were regular Army or drafted, we performed and we went out on these missions to win the battles. I mean, nothing was held back. And I think that the command levels were doing everything they could to figure out ways, to get into the enemy sanctuaries, stop the infiltration routes. And even Westmoreland, when he was there, General Westmoreland, he had a plan. He wanted to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail from Laos all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And they wouldn't let him. We made incursions into Laos and Cambodia. The Cambodian one occurred right after I left, and it was in the early 70s. It was about 8 months after I left. We had another operation in 71, Operation Lam Song, that went into Laos, mostly with South Vietnamese troops by then. And that was reasonably successful, but it didn't end it. It didn't cut the throat of anything. It just, because the North Vietnamese, they would hide, they would pull back and figure, hey, the Americans are going to go away. Let them go. We'll just wait them out. My reception wasn't bad. I mean, nobody called me a baby killer. Nobody spit on me. But it was very obvious to me that people were avoiding conversation. Kind of like walking around you like you might have been a landmine waiting to blow up. There was a lot of cautious engagement from, even my relatives and some of my old friends. They didn't necessarily prompt you to talk about it. The one that used to drive me and every Vietnam veteran crazy was, you'd get home and they'd say, how many people did you kill? It's like, it's not something we want to talk about, okay? And there was a lot of guys that, were confronted and spit on and just totally disrespected. And we use the saying today, they were confusing the war with the warrior. Today, that's not happening to these guys coming back. I don't think they get enough acknowledgement, but at least they're not getting spit at and called names, fighting a war that America didn't like. There's probably not a day goes by that Vietnam doesn't, go through my head in one shape, form, or another. It's something you wear with you for the rest of your life. And there was death, there was maiming, there was blood, there was guts, and a lot of times it was people you knew real well. After you're there a while, it kind of becomes part of the territory, part of the package. You do get battle hardened, you do get used to it. And then I think, again, that the trauma really probably doesn't sink in till you get home. I think a lot of it has to do with what a former combat soldier, what he does right out of the Army. A lot of guys got out of that and went and got jobs and started careers, got married, made babies, and really didn't have much time to think or worry about Vietnam. And then I've talked to guys that 20, 30 years later, now the kids are out of school, maybe they're divorced or something. They're a little more on their own, and they get time to think about it. And a lot of these memories come back, and it's painful. And then they go through a lot of problems. There's guys that experience PTSD for the first time 20, 30, 40 years after being in combat. So I think it depends on what your experience was directly getting out of the military. Drugs and alcohol have a lot to do with it. Some guys just came out and self-medicated themselves, And you know, that's like throwing gasoline on a fire.